All right, I'm recording. I'd like to introduce Dr. Jill Payne. I'll let Dr. Payne tell her official title. I can't keep up with it. She's rising. She's a rising star, and she moves so fast. I can't keep up with everything that she does. Dr. Payne teaches curriculum for us. She also does that for Gaston County Schools. That's her real job. She just hangs out with us on the side to help us out. I actually caddied for her last semester as her content coach, as she taught curriculum in the NESIS process last semester for a group of 14 Gaston County potential administrators, much like this group that we were working with last semester. And I'll tell you, y'all, I didn't have to tell anybody I didn't know anything, but I was in for a treat. I learned so much from her last semester. I was so impressed. That's why I asked her if she would join us to do this session today. So without any further ado, Dr. Jill Payne.
Good morning, everybody. I want to say thank you for allowing me to be here today. I'm Jill Payne. I am the Executive Director of Student Support Services in Gaston County Schools, and I also have the privilege of teaching at Gardner-Webb. To tell you a little bit about my history, I have been in education for 26, going on 27 years. Started off as a teacher assistant bus driver while I went back to school and got my teaching degree from Belmont Abbey College. And then I taught in elementary for 8 years, became assistant principal at a high school, did that for 2 years, and knew that my heart was in elementary. So I went back as assistant principal to Brookside Elementary School. All of my time has been in Gaston County, which is also where I'm a graduate of. Went back and got my master's, went into school administration, went to Forest View High School, back to Brookside Elementary School, then became principal at Brookside. And then in 2015, I was given the opportunity to open Hawks Nest STEAM Academy, which was our first magnet elementary STEAM program. And so over the course of 5 years at Hawks Nest, we increased our proficiency by 32 percentage points. We became a North Carolina model STEAM school, so I'm very proud of that. Now, as I am preparing for retirement, because that is in my horizon, I am wanting to begin a second career working with teachers and administrators to be the leaders that truly stay with the needs of our students, aligning the practices they are doing so that our students are growing the most. And that's where I have become employed and working with Gardner-Webb. Currently, I am serving as Executive Director of Student Support Services, and that is just nurses, social workers, counselors, COVID, all of the different things that are going on with students to make sure that they can go to the classroom and be successful. So today I would like to, I'm going to share my screen so that we can get started on differentiated instruction. But before I do that, are there any questions thus far?
All right, Dr. Payne, we're going to, I think we might actually have success in our tech.
Perfect.
At least in us being able to see you. So I'm going to turn off my volume.
Okay.
So everyone's volume is off. All right, so I think, oops. All right, Dr. Payne, I think you're good. But you're muted.
Okay, now I'll get started. I was going to do some interactive today. We'll try it. If it doesn't work, we'll go straight through. But I know you don't want to sit and just listen to me the whole time. But thank you again for having me today. I'm going to share my screen so we can get started. Give me just a second. Okay, So our differentiated instruction, making sure that we are meeting the needs of all learners. And many of you are going to come into this today and you're either going to realize, okay, this is something that I did as a teacher and I see throughout my classrooms in my school. This is something that I was aware of, but I really never knew how to get started, or it's not anything that I see in my school and I need to figure out what my next steps are. Or it could be that you come into this and say, I'm aware of what differentiated instruction is. I've never done it. I don't see it throughout my building. So where do I start from that? How do I, as the instructional leader, lead differentiated instruction in my building so that I can make sure the needs of every learner in my building is being met? And I think that is the key word as we launch, is that differentiated instruction, where it is different, is that it applies to all learners. So making sure that we are working to meet the needs of all of our kiddos. Give me just a second because I am on the end of the slideshow and it has the same title and I need to be at the beginning. All right, let's try that again. Okay. So the goals today, we want to define what differentiated instruction is. We're going to reflect on the diversity and the differentiation in your classroom. Looking at how I know last month you guys did a session on evaluation with the NESIS instrument. So we're going to look at where on that NESIS instrument you actually evaluate differentiated instruction. And then what are strategies you can use to increase differentiated instruction in your building and in your classrooms. And then how can you as an instructional leader in your building use differentiation to meet the needs of your learners? So what I was going to do, and maybe we can do it on our chat so that if you can't unmute, but when you look at this image, what do you see in this image?
We're going to try to see if there's feedback, but it doesn't sound like it. Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Oh, good. I don't know if you guys just want to yell out, but there we go.
So the first picture to the left, everyone has like an equal board, but in the second picture, according to height, they have what they need in order to be able to see over the fence. And so it's not necessarily equal, but they have the support that they need.
I love that. Not equal, but it's what they need. Okay, what else do you see? Look at the engagement of the little guy in purple. What do you notice about him?
He's actually, once he has what he needs, he's actually engaged.
That is exactly right. And that's the big thing out of this. The goal of this picture is the family was going to go to the baseball game and watch a baseball game, but the little guy in purple could not engage effectively or the way that they desired in the first picture. But with the right supports, he was able to have equal access, not equal supports, but equal access to the game. And therefore there wasn't behavior problems, because you know that little guy in that first picture, after about the first inning, was going to be over it. And he was going to start getting off the little crate, running around. Then dad wasn't going to be able to watch the game, right? Y'all see that in your classrooms? Where kids are not engaged, they get off task, and then the teacher gets frustrated, and then you have discipline issues. So differentiation is meeting students where they are, but it's also going to promote engagement in our classroom as well as lowering discipline throughout your building, because the students are going to have what they need to be able to access the curriculum. So it's a responsive teaching rather than a one-size-fits-all teaching. And when I talked to my staff at Hawks Nest, one of the things I always said to them was responsive does not mean reactive. Responsive is purposeful, planned. It is in the moment, but you have a plan in place for what am I going to do when a student has an issue or when a student has a different set of needs. And we'll talk more about that today. So do you guys use MTSS framework in your district?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. So one of the misconceptions that I've seen across the board is that in differentiated instruction, people think that differentiation is just interventions. And in reality, you can differentiate in your tier 1. So your core instruction, by the way you ask questions, by the type of instructional models that you use, by the the types of text used. There's lots of ways you can differentiate even within your core, as well as what you do at that level 2 and that level 3. So making sure that you are using that framework to differentiate at all levels to make sure that students who may not be a student that's going to get you a proficiency point because there's such a wide achievement gap there, but they are a student who needs to be exposed to that curriculum. And so in your core curriculum, you would have to differentiate by the types of questions you ask, maybe by the text that you use. And we'll talk again a little bit more about that. I love this definition. It's when a differentiation is when a teacher proactively plans. When is this work going to happen?
Before, after school, or during planning time?
That's exactly right. Your PLC time. That's when you should be unpacking those standards, knowing what teachers are, so that teachers know what they are teaching, and they're going to be proactive to think about, what am I going to do? Those 4 PLC questions. What am I going to do if students have it? What am I going to do if they don't have it? How am I going to assess it? I put them out of order, but the 4 questions. So not only are they going to proactively plan, they're going to have a variety of approaches because every student in their classroom does not learn the exact same way. So one thing you're looking for when you're looking for differentiation is that when you go into a classroom, you shouldn't see the same exact thing every single day. Structure is very good in a classroom, but making sure that we are tapping into the needs of all of our learners are also important. So we're also going to use a variety of instruction to make sure that we teach students what they need to learn. And then we're going to talk about how they will learn it. So that's the what they need to learn is what I'm going to teach. How they will learn it, what they're going to practice, how they're going to make meaning of that learning. And then how are they going to show what they have learned? That's the assessment. So again, it goes back to those PLC questions. And then the goal is that we should always be focused on increasing the likelihood that students will learn as much as they can as quickly as possible. So my rule of thumb, and I think it's probably in another slide, was always that students should come in and from their starting point, they should grow a minimum of 1 year. If you are the highest kid in my grade level, I need you to grow a year. If you are the lowest kid in my grade level, I need you to grow a minimum of 1 year, but that student, I need to grow 1.5 years or more so that I can begin to close that achievement gap. And in doing so, I've got to really put thought into the planning. So the teacher's work is going to be so important in the planning to look at what do they need to learn? What do they need to know to be able to access the standards? So what scaffolding am I going to do so that that student can look up over the fence? How does this student learn? How can I provide them opportunities to learn? And then how can I allow them to show me that they learn? Because every student doesn't need to do a paper pencil test every time. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. So this is a teaching and learning cycle. And the big thing that I take away from this is that we are analyzing throughout the cycle where students are, making revisions to meet the needs of what they have accomplished, what they have mastered, and then what do they still need to learn. So why do we do differentiated instruction? Well, we should be leading our teachers as instructional leaders. We should be leading them in monitoring student growth and performance. One of the misconceptions of some of my principals where I'm at now is that my teachers analyze data. I don't necessarily know all of the information on my students, but what I encourage you is as you move from assistant principal and through your assistant principal journey going into principal role, be a part of those data talks. Know what students are being successful and what students are struggling. It's super important for you to be aware of that so that when you are doing walkthroughs and observations, that you are able to have conversations with students and monitor them, but then you're also able to have conversations with teachers. So it's important for you to be a part of that and leading that analysis of data, making sure that teachers understand that they need to grow every student for 1 year. And then making sure, like I just said a second ago, that we close the gap by growing those students who are below grade level for more than 1 year. Our responsibility, and I love this quote in this picture, is that we need to see in students what they can't yet see in themselves. If we don't believe in students, it's going to be hard for us to help them believe in themselves. And if we don't give them attainable goals to help close the gaps that they have, and we don't stretch those who are ready to be stretched, then we're not going to maximize their ability and their success. So what is differentiation? It is where we create a climate. It is where we have a room that is set up for learning. We have our learning targets out. We have our whatever students need to access to be able or to use what resources. So our anchor charts, we have books and manipulatives depending on what students need, making sure that that environment is, and that climate in that classroom is a safe environment where they're willing to take risks. I was in Colorado this past week at the Modern Teacher Conference, and we visited schools one day. And one of the things that is so powerful to me when you really create that climate is to where a student can say, I'm a level 1, and this is what I struggle with, but this is how I'm working to get to a level 2. And this student might say, I'm a level 4, but here's what I'm working on to grow as a high learner. So in order to do that, though, we have to know our learners. We have to use the assessment to guide all of our decisions in how we adjust our curriculum, how we compact and how we group things to see what they know and what we need to add in to make sure that they're going to be able to access the content standards we are teaching. We have to provide students with choice and voice. That is so important, but that is hard for teachers because then I'm giving up my control of that classroom and giving students ownership of that learning. And that's a hard transition. So if you have teachers that are not there, know that that is a lengthy process for them to turn that control over. Your teachers have to know best instructional strategies. And as an instructional leader, you have to know best instructional strategies. And the ultimate goal is that we want to make our classrooms personalized so that we have a plan where students are working to meet the standard that is at their grade level, but working at the pace that is meeting their ability levels and their needs. It is not taking our standards and lowering it down for them. We still have to have those high expectations. We may have to scaffold and we may have to put in some prerequisite skills so that they can access it, but it's not lowering it down and just doing very low level thinking. It is not one size fits all. It is not everybody doing the same thing, but we put it into stations. I had a teacher that told me that she was differentiating learning for her students. And when I went in, every student at the end of the class completed all the exact same lessons, but they were in stations. And so we had to have a conversation about what are you doing to meet student individual needs. It's not the student's responsibility to connect with the curriculum. It's our responsibility to help them be prepared to engage and to have what they need to engage. And it is not teachers having to write a separate lesson plan for each learner. Do you have teachers who make differentiation very hard because they feel like it's way too much? They're not able to bite off a piece of the puzzle at a time. Do y'all experience that?
Mm-hmm.
I did too. So we're going to look at a differentiated classroom. Look at this picture. This is a picture I'll go ahead and tell you is no differentiation. What do you notice about this picture?
They're all expected to be doing the same thing, facing the same direction, sitting in the same way.
Everything about their class environment is the same. That is exactly right. Who's doing the work right now?
The teacher.
Sage on the stage, trying to, that control, I'm going to give them everything that they need. And it's not that they're doing bad, but they don't realize that students have to take the learning and make meaning of it so that they can internalize it. So if I'm talking the whole time, like today is a horrible example of differentiation because I'm talking the whole time. But if a teacher is standing in front of a room of students and the teacher is talking the whole time, you've got kids who have ADHD, they're gone. Student attention span, 20 to 30 minutes in a middle and high school is a good time for your mini lesson. Elementary, we're looking at 15, 20 max. So looking at the amount of time that you give them and then how you allow them to then go and make meaning and practice that learning. All right, let's look at the next one. This is not as clear of a picture as I thought it was, and I apologize for that. But look at that classroom. What do you notice about it?
The students seem to be busy at work, doing different things.
And it does look like they're doing different things. One group has markers out, one group has just papers, and then almost everybody looks engaged. You've got some kid, that one girl standing You think the teacher might allow them to stand? Is that a need some of our students have? And we have some teachers, if your district's anything like my district, we have some teachers that are just put out that a student can actually stand up. And if I would let them stand, they're going to engage in their work. Sometimes that's hard for people to allow that kind of change to happen, but that is a way we differentiate in our learning environment. Other things that happen in it's called micro differentiation, but a classroom where we're beginning to explore with differentiation is that we're allowing students to begin to extend. We're not saying you do this and then you go read a book. We're allowing them to think on past the assignment that is provided. We're looking at giving students some choice. We're looking at, okay, this student, I can use a rubric. I can do different modes of grading so that it meets the needs of where the student is versus everybody's on the same page. So we're starting to analyze that data. It might be that when I'm doing my mini lessons, I'm purposefully adjusting my questions based on the responses I have given or based on the data that I have from my pre-assessment. The macro differentiation, or where differentiation is in full bloom. Look at this class and what do you see?
None of them are doing the same thing. And the teacher seems to be doing some small group.
Small group instruction that they're working on one task, another group they're working together in a side thing. And then after I looked at that picture a little more, the girl that's standing up at the chart paper, do we think she's the teacher or could she be another student?
She's actually a student.
She could be either or. I think the thing that you'll see in a classroom where differentiation is happening is that not only is the data analyzed, I know what my students know and I know what my students still need to learn, but then I use that data to plan my instruction. And I plan purposefully to make sure that the lessons that I have for them or the activities that I have for them are going to engage them. One of the things with variable pacing, our district, I'm not sure about yours, but our district has a pacing guide that our classrooms follow. And so I went to my ED of elementary instruction and said, when I was principal, and said, hey, can I realign my science to match my ELA? And here's why. This science standard and this ELA standard align, and it's going to allow us to combine the two so I can compact and I can make sure that we're writing about the science, not just about a different topic, and we're reading about the science because we're doing informational text. And I was able to align it that way, which then allowed us more time to practice the skills that we were working on. So those are things that you will see. The other thing that I think is so important is flexible grouping occurs. And so that's something when you're in the classrooms, when you're doing walkthroughs or evaluations, you will see that Jill may be in this math group in the top group because I have mastered the standard that's being taught. And so now I'm doing problem solving with it. But in this ELA group, I may be struggling with the theme of the story in a 5th or 6th grade classroom. And so I may be in a lower level group because that's the skill I work with. Next week, our skill might be vocabulary and I have mastered that. So I might be in an upper group. So the groups are flexible. And they're fluid based on the need of the student. I will tell you that when you start the work of differentiation and really focusing on what it looks like in your building, getting to this level is typically about a 2 to 3 year process if you do it with quality, because you can go in and ask everybody to be at this level right away, and you can give them tools. But if you don't grow them the same way that we're talking about growing students, the sustainability of the work doesn't always happen. So you have to pick 1 or 2 things to work on at a time with your teachers, just like we'll tell them to do with their students. The other part of a differentiated classroom where it is in full effect, students are going to know their data. They're going to know what they scored, why they scored it, and what they need to do to continue to grow and learn. And their grading is going to be reflective of their performance in the classroom based on what they are doing. And so it'll look a little different. So I'm going to go back for just a second. I want you to take just a minute, and I want you to, and you can jot notes. Don't look at each other's paper. Think about your classrooms in your building. Write down the initials of 1 or 2 teachers that you see that you can automatically think of when you think of a classroom where there's no differentiation. There's a sage on the stage. They are doing all the work, and the kids all have the same assignments when they're done.
Building.
Shoes off, who's with us?
Mhm.
Now think about those classrooms where you've got teachers who do some differentiation. It's not consistent throughout their day. It's not specific to the specific student. It's to groups of students. So they're exploring with it. They're using some of it. Write down the initials of, and the reason I say initials is just so that people's names are protected. But write down the initials of 1 or 2 teachers that you see of in that micro differentiation classroom where they're starting to explore. And then think about your classroom. Do you have a classroom where differentiation is a part of what they do? The teacher just gets that if I meet the needs of my learners, they're going to be engaged in learning and the growth occurs. And the growth is always what's going to help us get to the proficiency.
Mhm.
Dr. Payne, while they're doing that, I have a question.
Yes, sir.
Do you, in your work that you have done and in your experience, are you finding that is there and I may be jumping ahead of you on this, so if I am, forgive me. Are you finding a connection between the characteristics of teachers that are no differentiation, micro differentiation, and macro differentiation? As it relates to experience or subject areas, or is there a common thread between those that do it micro or do it macro?
I think that your no differentiation classrooms, in my experience, have been more of my teachers who that's how we did school. Because when I was in school, there was no differentiation, or I don't remember differentiation. I remember my teacher standing up and talking a good bit and doing the work. But that doesn't mean all teachers in that category, but there's a lot of teachers who are in that area, or teachers that are not my weaker teachers who don't know how to give over the control and keep students engaged. So a lower managed classroom a lot of times has no differentiation.
Mhm.
My
Here's a lot
macro
of
different. Go ahead.
nods and agreement around the table.
And then my macro differentiation are my teachers who get it, who just, you know how you have those natural teachers who understand teaching, but they understand data, they understand how to connect the puzzle pieces to make it happen. And one of the things that I think is so crucial is that as instructional leaders, we have to model that. And so that's what we're going to talk about in just a minute, but you've got to model with your staff. If you give your staff a one-size-fits-all PD plan and everybody has to attend every PD session just because, as a teacher who's going to do her very best in everything, I may already be well-versed in that. And part of it, yes, I know we have to attend every certain things just because the state says or the district says, I get that. But I'm talking about how you take what you're doing in your building and how do you model that for teachers so that they understand, oh, I know how to, let's say you're doing a Microsoft Office PD and all of your teachers are going to be doing all of the, not Microsoft Office, I'm sorry. You're going to do a Google because I know Google. You're going to do a Google PD with your staff and all of your teachers, you require every teacher to come to that Google training. Well, if you've got somebody who's already a Google certified teacher, what would be the benefit of them having to sit in the training? Now, could they help you lead the training? Absolutely. But if you do an assessment of your staff, you can model for them. Jill, you know how to do slide decks. You know how to do Google Sheets. You know how to do this. So what I would like for you to do is to set up a classroom and help us this way. You're going to be differentiating for your staff. I think we can just model that, and then we can model in our classrooms how to make the data analysis and the instruction align through our PLCs. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Can
I
I
went off on-
interject? Can I interject something here? I'm always the bad example. And to Dr. Kennedy's question, one of the mistakes that I made, I'm gonna use me as the bad example, and that I made early on in my career was thinking that I was principal when we stopped doing ability grouping and started doing homogeneous grouping and started doing flex and started trying to differentiate. And one of the mistakes that I made, the banana in the tailpipe for me, was thinking that I could look at a teacher's room the way that he or she had arranged it. And I could tell if they were differentiating, if they had taken the desk out of the rows. But what I found out was that was a lack of understanding on my part. As a neophyte trying to learn this as a principal, that simply because teachers made their rooms look like everybody else's does not mean they're differentiated. So let me be the bad example here. Thank you.
And Dr. Lamb, that is so true. I think that it is important. One of the things we'll talk about in a minute is your environment. You got to set it up for success, but the work that students are doing is where the differentiation comes in. How you use your data to align the work that they need to do so that they can access the standards. So what I want you to do for just a minute is think about that teacher in the no differentiation classroom, and with your table partner, whoever you're beside of, just don't give the names, but think of share one or two things that you see in their classroom that tells you that there's no differentiation. I'm gonna take 1 minute.
They're really trying to get past these first. When they don't even know.
Mhm.
I'm thinking of a teacher that is just, here's what we're doing today.
Mhm.
I'm going to tell you about it. And when we're done, here's a sheet that you're going to read. And
Yeah.
answer questions.
Yeah. Mhm.
So share out with us one thing that somebody share out what you thought about that classroom with no differentiation.
Mhm. Mhm.
Anything specific you would think of when you see those classrooms with no differentiation? What are the things that you notice when you walk in your building?
I was saying that the teacher that I was thinking about, she's not strong with curriculum. So she doesn't know how to differentiate because she doesn't know the curriculum. She doesn't know how to give them grade level curriculum first. So therefore she can't break it down and differentiate anything right now.
And the good thing about that teacher is if you can help her realize she doesn't know the curriculum, you can grow that all day long.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mhm.
Absolutely.
At the middle school, we talked about poor classroom management and the discipline correlation. Most of the kids that we see, if you really dig down, they have a deficit in learning, and that's why they act out. Like, why should they be somewhere where they can't do it and they're not being helped? And so we end up spending a lot of quality time with them.
Mhm.
And so in my new role, I'm over discipline and alternative ed. And the number of students who come to me for an alternative ed hearing that do not have an intervention, that nothing is differentiated to meet their needs, and they are significantly below grade level, therefore they can't do the work. They're like the little kid in purple standing at the fence, and they can only stand there and look through a crack for so long. And we've got to help our teachers understand that. Do you think that sometimes there's a belief that the kids can't do, so why do it? We hope not, but do you believe that? Or do you see that?
Mhm.
So going back to that slide, we've got to help our staff get to the point where they're seeing in students and they're believing in students so that they'll do the hard work to help them get there and be their best version of their self. All right, think about that micro differentiation. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you 2 minutes this time and talk about a teacher that is just in the beginning stages. And then if you have a teacher who is pretty solid in differentiation, talk about them, and then we'll share out about both of those areas.
Do you have anybody at your school that I feel like we're in the no differentiation stage?
I'm feeling bad, Dr. Payne, that you couldn't see everybody. We've got a really engaged group, but
I can hear them. I like it.
It's just hard to have that person to share out sometimes. And so that's a wonderful job. But I kind of go down and say, hey, why don't you go tell such and such what you're doing? Hey, why don't you go and do this and try to help her to show what she's doing and show how she's making up her group.
so Dr. Payne, while they're working, I realized we didn't kind of introduce you to the group, but we have 3 elementary APs, 2 middle school APs, and 2 high school APs at the table.
But,
A couple
We
of
have a
students
good-
are- We have MSA grads.
I feel like teachers more.
There's a good variety there. That'll be good because that helps us see that it's a
More like-
problem that is consistent across the board.
Oh, absolutely.
Rather than having like true differentiation going on.
Yeah.
So it's like.
So-
it's kind of-
Let's come back together and let's talk about that classroom where they are starting to implement differentiation. What do you see when you walk through those buildings, when they walk through those classrooms?
Can you repeat the question? I missed it. I'm sorry.
You are fine. I said, when you're walking through classrooms where you've got teachers that are engaging in differentiation, maybe not a fully fledged engaged class or differentiated classroom, what do you see when you walk through those classrooms? What would it look like?
I think when I go in, it looks like students are working on different things and they are grouped and they are doing different things, but they might not be as engaged. It's not just running as smoothly as the macro. And they're starting, but it's not quite efficient and 100% effective yet.
Okay. Anybody else? And what about does anybody have a classroom where differentiation is running? Teachers got it. They know what to do. Most of the times, I will tell you, not always, but most of the times, these are going to be your classes when you look at your EVOS scores are going to be your blue growth people. They're going to exceed growth with all their students because they understand how you have to meet every student's level, that every student has to grow. Anybody got a good example?
There's one teacher at the primary school. She leads a small group and she's understanding what they need, but her plans for her small group are so detailed. She knows who's going to be partnered with who, what are they going to do, and although they are not with her, all students are still being challenged, and they are well aware of what to do in each station that they're in.
So let me ask you a question. Do you get a lot of discipline referrals from that classroom?
No.
No. And if we could help our teachers understand, if they will do the hard work in planning, so what is happening in their classroom is purposeful, that is the structure that students need to be able to engage successfully. And then that will minimize your discipline referrals. The other thing that I will tell you is technology will help your teachers with that. And so we'll talk a little bit about that in just a minute, how they can organize this and make it happen. One of the other questions I had real quick before we go on is, in a macro differentiation classroom, students are aware that they're all working on different things, aren't they?
Mm-hmm.
And it's okay, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
And it's because we've created that culture in that classroom that every learner has different needs and that we have to meet the needs of our learners. I remember when I first started teaching, if I was going to differentiate, I had to be so careful that somebody else didn't find out that they were going to be doing different work because I might embarrass the student. And that was the culture of our school that I was at, was you had to be so, it was almost like we were top secret trying to make this happen. But now you can create a culture in your classroom to where I'm going to give every student, and I always have the conversation when I was principal, I would talk to my students, it's fair is not equal. I'm going to do what's right by every one of you in this building. And it's not always going to look the same because you don't have the same needs. And so we had those conversations, and those are things that I think if we equip our teachers to have, but I also will tell you that that starts with your leadership, having those conversations with your staff, realizing every staff member is not going to come to the table for differentiation and have the same skill sets. If you did a pre-assessment with them, they're all going to be at different levels. And so then your plan of growing those teachers is going to have to be differentiated based on where they're at, their readiness and their abilities and their buy-in. because that's huge. And we all know that if a teacher's totally not buying in, we're going to have to fight a harder battle, right?
Mhm.
Across the board. All right. So you were talking about last month evaluating. So when you're thinking about differentiated classrooms, you're thinking about the no differentiation, the micro and the macro. Where on this standard 2 part of the evaluation, so it's standard 2 element D, where would you be marking for differentiation here? And what are some keywords you see?
Unique learning opportunities.
Unique learning opportunities. Let's go to proficient. Collaborates with specialists who can support the special learning needs of students. Well, first of all, I will tell you, I had teachers in my building who thought when it said special learning needs, what population do you think they were talking about?
Your EC students.
My teachers all thought that this just referred to EC students. If you go up to the top, I don't know if you can see my cursor, but right up here, it says teachers, this is in the blue beside of the element. Teachers collaborate with the range of support specialists to help meet the special needs of what kind of students?
Oh.
So that is not talking about just my EC kiddos. That's talking about my AIG. That's talking about my EL. That's talking about my 504 kids that have special needs. Any student who has a need that we are working to meet those needs. I think the difference between proficient and accomplished is there's one big word. What's the difference between those two?
Understands.
Understands it, and all students. So in a proficient teacher, y'all, I'm so sorry. I took today off and my husband is building a shelf for me out in the garage. Can y'all hear that?
No.
Okay, very good. It was a lot of hammering and I thought, oh Lord. Okay, so a proficient teacher is beginning to differentiate, to do plans that are specific to the needs of students. Many times a proficient teacher is looking at my EC students, or I may be looking at my AIG students to see what I'm going to do to challenge them, but I'm not looking at all. An accomplished teacher is going to begin to understand, work with the other support staff, but they're going to be differentiating based on all students. And then a distinguished teacher, what are they going to be doing? Can y'all see that?
Mhm.
Yeah.
They're extending it outside the classroom. So not only are they doing it, they're helping the rest of the building understand as well.
That's absolutely right. And I hope that y'all use your nieces tool. I've got a lot of colleagues who in the past it's been a checkbox. Let me get my observations done so I can check it off on my list and turn it in. My post conference is like, do you see anything? Are you good with it? I will tell you, this is the greatest growth tool if you will use it, because it allows you to have specific conversations. How easy when a teacher comes to you and says, why did you mark me proficient in adapting to meet the needs of my students? And you can say, well, let's look at that key word. You understand the role and you work with other teachers. Tell me who you're working with to help support your students. But it says you meet the special needs of all students. Tell me what you're doing for all. What are you doing to differentiate for all? And you leave the table silent for a few minutes and let them sit and think on it. Okay, let's talk about what you're going to do to get accomplished next time. There's a plan of attack to help launch differentiation in a classroom. The next area is standard 4, facilitating learning for your students. Someone who is proficient understands the developmental levels of students and appropriately differentiates. What's the difference between appropriately differentiates and accomplished? So proficient and accomplished.
I'm going to say the keywords are consistently and appropriately.
Consistently and appropriately. And I think the other keyword is identifies. So I have used pre-assessment data to identify what my students need, where they are and what they need next. And then I'm consistent in my differentiation of that. And then a distinguished, again, is going out in my building. The Standard 4B talks about how I use data to plan instruction. Then I monitor their performance. Is that important for differentiation? I got to monitor that. I've got to do those formative assessments so that I can continue. If you think back to that cycle we had, continue to analyze and reflect on where they are and realign what we're doing. The last one, I don't know why this is printed like this, but in facilitating learning for standard 5, no, that's still 4, sorry. Let's go to 5. There we go. G. I believe this is 5 still. But communicating effectively and then using the information gained from assessments to improve the teaching. So you're using, we just did that one. So let's stop right here. Can you use your evaluation tool to guide your conversations and provide feedback to teachers on differentiation? Have y'all been doing that? And it's okay if you haven't. I think go ahead.
I was talking to our other AP in the building, I think yesterday maybe, under that specific standard, I ask every single teacher I observe, what are you doing to meet the specific needs of your kids? And it's overwhelming the number of folks who tell me, but you didn't observe my inclusion class. And so I'm asking the question, I'm starting to delve into it, but knowing where to go, like I kind of stupefy when they say, but that wasn't inclusion. And I'm like, okay, I'm on the first floor, you're in the basement. I need to recalibrate. And I think that's where I stop because I don't know where to go from there always.
So I think we're getting ready to talk about that. So I hope that this will help you. So first thing you have to do is you've got to be familiar with your students. One of the things that you can do to help determine when you are rating those teachers is you have to look at when you're going into classrooms, when you're doing walkthroughs and when you're doing evaluations. Don't be the person that just sits in the back of the room and takes notes. Go talk to your kids. Tell me what you're learning. What's your learning target today? What are your goals for today? Talk to me about what your activity is. All you got to do is tell a kid, tell me what you're learning about. And you know whether they know what they're learning. You know whether when you walk from table to table, whether everybody's doing the same. When I was in Colorado, I didn't know those kids from anybody, but I said to one of the little boys, I said, now, does everybody in your room have to do this activity? And he was like, oh, no. This is only if you're in a level 3. So he knew right off the bat that everybody's doing different things. He could talk it. So he knew it. That'll help you know exactly what's going on with your teachers and in your classroom, but it'll also help you know your students. If you go in your classroom and you ask Johnny, or you look at the writing that's going on if you're elementary, and Johnny can barely do letter strings, and the rest of the class is writing 3 sentences. If you go into a high school class and the kid can't get 3 thoughts down on paper, the rest of the class is writing a paper, then we know we need to be talking about what Johnny's doing. But if you also walk around and you see that Jack has finished his paper, you read it and you think, amazing, but he's done and now he's just reading. Not that just reading's bad, but what could you do to extend the thinking? And so that'll help you ask questions of your staff. So you've got to know the content they're teaching and you've got to know the students. That doesn't mean you're the expert. It means you have to be familiar and you need to know where to find the information. The second thing is your teachers must be the expert in their content. So if you've got teachers who don't know their content, the first area of attack is to start looking at unpacking standards. And you've got to be able to sit down with them and unpack the standards so they can know what students are supposed to be doing. And then that vertical alignment. If students can't do this, what is it, the gaps that they're going to be missing? What do we need to do before we start touching on the standards? Does that make sense? The other thing you got to do is we talk to them about having high interest, and the learner profile is more, how do they learn best? What are their needs for them to be able to learn successfully in a classroom? So the 4 areas that you're going to help them with differentiation. I always say the learning environment is where you start because that's the easiest to start with. When you think back to the no differentiation classroom, I'm going to go back up to it for a minute because that's really important to me. When you think about that classroom, What on that board says we're learning anything? What in his room sets up that day for learning?
Nothing.
Nothing. So the first thing you're going to do with this teacher is talk about how their room needs to be set up. Everybody's sitting in straight rows. Are they promoting collaboration of any kind?
No.
Those learning spaces in your room, one of the most powerful things that my teachers did when we were at Hawksnest, we went through training, and one of the most powerful things that they did was they set up a quiet space in the classroom. So if you're working in this area when we're doing independent time and you have the ability, because of student choice, to get up and move, there's an area, if you're going to be reading and doing something quiet and you really need to be able to concentrate, you can go to this area. If you're on technology where everybody's hitting keyboards and there's stuff moving around and it's not as quiet, you might go to this area. Then there might be a table for group work. Setting that classroom up is, I think, first and foremost a priority. And that class culture, really working on our goal is to help each other, and we're not, how we treat each other matters. Okay, I'm going back to my little chart. Sorry. Right here. The second phase is content. So while they're setting their rooms up right, the next level is we have to learn how to unpack our standards. And then we have to talk about what does that look like? And I'm going to show you an example in just a minute of the work that can be done in there. Y'all, this is hard work. It's not quick work. It is when you truly unpack the standards where they know what students can be able to do. And then they begin to go through and do a progression. A student on grade level can do this. A student that's behind, here are the skills that they need to have to be able to access the course standards. And then what's next for students who have already mastered it? That's a lot of hard work. So you have to go into it knowing and owning that it's not easy or fast work. The process, what activities am I going to provide to meet the needs and the levels of the students? And then the products, that is the assessment piece. So in Gaston County, we call this our content is our learn about it. That's my teacher instruction or any activities that students can do to review this instruction that the teacher provided. Our process, what are students going to do to make meaning of the learning? That's what we call our practice it. So we have a learn about it, a practice it, and then our students have evidence of learning, which is our product, our assessment piece. Okay. So what you do is you start off with pre-assessment. So if you're saying, okay, how do I help my teachers understand this? You say, first thing I want you to do is we're going to walk this road together. You might have to coach one teacher at a time to get it started. You might coach one grade level at a time, but we're going to do a pre-assessment. We've unpacked our standard as a group. We're going to do a pre-assessment. It needs to be quick, but it needs to measure exactly what students are supposed to be able to do with that standard. That will give you the information. So the second box of what the student's readiness and ability is. So are they ready to access that standard? Are they ready to learn that? Or do they have gaps that we need to fill in first? You align that with your standards to make sure that they're all in alignment. Then you're going to plan your teaching from that. You're going to plan the process. What is the work the students are going to do? And how am I going to do this work? Whole group? Am I going to do a mini lesson and then put them into group work to make meaning? Or are they going to do it individually? Or are they going to work through a learning plan that is a variety of those opportunities? And then there's the assessment. So the first thing you have to do is unpack standards. Let me go back. First thing I would say you do is you set up the classroom and get the teachers believing that kids have to have some choice and voice. The second part is you're going to unpack standards so that they can know the curriculum that needs to be in place. With that learning environment, you're going to continue to work on making sure that they have the procedures so that while they're pulling small groups, when that work starts, students know what to do. Somebody was talking about the primary teacher, that it's not perfect, but those students, when they're out working independently, they have work that is meaningful work to do, and they know what to do in the time independently so that the teacher can pull small groups. So that's the second phase. You've got to unpack the standards, and then you have to plan the lessons. I will tell you, if you can get your teams planning that together, that makes all the difference in the world. My teams would sit down and break apart, and this teacher's going to take and pull things that are for those kids who need extensions. This teacher's going to pull the things. I don't know how many teachers you have on your grade level. I had 3, and this teacher was pulled, teacher B pulled for those kids who were on grade level that just needed to practice so they could solidify that skill. And then I had teachers that were pulling those those things that were going to help those learners who were not at the place that they needed to be, and they needed some of those prerequisite skills. So we shared the work because it's a lot of work. Okay. The other part is helping them understand the difference in the two classrooms. So what do you see are things that you need in a differentiated classroom? Is the teacher going to be the one talking? Or are they going to be a facilitator?
Facilitator.
Are the students going to be compliant or engaged?
Engaged.
There's going to be a lot of talking. It's probably going to be noisier than ever. And one of the things when I would do tours of Hawks Nest, because since we were a model school, people would come look. And I always said to them, before you make a judgment about the noise in the classrooms, I want you to pause and listen to the conversations. Because I remember going into there, because when I started that school, I didn't know anything about a STEAM school. I was learning with my teachers, but my classrooms were always loud talking all the time. But when I got to the point that I got over Jill doesn't like loud, and I started listening to conversations, kids were talking about their learning and they were making meaning of the things that they were supposed to be doing. So making sure that teachers understand that it's okay, but there's got to be procedures in there. And I think that was one of the things we talked about a minute ago. Many of our non-differentiated classrooms are because of lack of management. Our curriculum, you can have a scripted program and it looked totally different in a traditional classroom and a differentiated classroom. A differentiated classroom teacher is going to take that program and they're going to look at what do my students need, and they're going to modify it to meet the needs of that classroom and those students. More materials, more resources available. The room's going to be set up. And then the assessment piece, you're going to have a lot more choice and voice in that. One of the things that I think is super important is that you promote not putting a cap on what students can do. So when you assess kids, the coolest thing I ever saw was when I had a 4th grade student that was learning about human body, I believe it was. And he said, I really like music and I would really like to play a song to show that I understand this. And my teacher, I was so proud of her because I would have probably been like, let's think about this. But my teacher said, write a song, be ready to present it when it's time to do the test. And afterwards, you're going to still have to take the paper pencil test because I have to do that because our district requires it. But I'm going to grade you on your song. Can you show me evidence that you have learned? Here's the standards we've covered. And he wrote a song and brought his guitar to school and he presented his song and you could see that he knew it. I would guarantee you that on that end of grade test, on the science test, and I'm just making this up because 4th grade doesn't take a science test, but if he was taking an end of grade test, I'm guaranteeing you that that student could answer any questions about the human body because he had made meaning of that learning through a way that was important and relevant to him. Would y'all agree?
Yeah.
Most definitely.
So how do you lead? It's going to start in your PLCs, doing the work of unpacking the standard, answering those questions. What do students need to learn? What is it going to look like if, how are we going to assess it? What does it look like if they've got it? And what does it look like if they don't have it? You're going to be walking through, talking to kids, seeing what students are engaged in the learning, asking them if they know their standards. And then with your evaluations, and you'll be providing those, having those crucial conversations and providing that feedback. So in providing feedback, this is another talking time. In providing feedback, look at this classroom. What feedback? What are 2 things that you would start with this? Because real quick, and I know I'm going over my time, coaching. With coaching, giving them 1 or 2 things to work on at a time is all you can do. Because if you go in there and just give them everything, they get overwhelmed and don't do anything, right? So if you had this classroom, what are the 2 things you would have them work on?
I think I'd start with making them understand why their method is not best for all the learners, and maybe bringing some data in to show, their starting point, depending on what we have. And just kind of understanding that there's no possible way that all these kids are on the exact same level and should be taught the same way.
Perfect. What else?
I know this is probably like a very small piece, but this room looks very sterile. So it does not invite me to learning. And so I think maybe looking at the environment of the room, how can we make this room seem more inviting, more kid-centered, more learning friendly, I guess.
Mhm. I love it. My two things were he would have to at least have his learning targets on the board so kids knew what they were working for. But the other thing that I said is I use timers as a way to make changes in my classrooms as a principal. And so I would give him a timer. If he's high school, I would say set it for 30 minutes. You can't talk more than 30 minutes. After that, you need to start facilitating activities and going around and conferencing with kids. But you can't talk more than for 30 minutes. So you got to come up with your game plan to where you can't talk more than 30. After we got him to where he was only talking for 30 minutes of the lesson, we would back it up to 25. We would back it up a little bit more so that then he had more time to engage with students. But I love bringing the data to help him understand why this is not the best method. If you're going to have him really start thinking about how his room is more inviting, I will recommend whether you send them in your school or to another school, have them go visit several classrooms and come back and talk to you about what made you want to be a student in that classroom. What do we need to do in your classroom? The second part of coaching, 1 to 2 things to work on, but make them give you 2 specific action steps they're going to complete that you can monitor. Because the worst thing that happens when we coach teachers is when we talk about the work that needs to be done, but we don't leave with action steps. Therefore, the work never happens because everybody gets busy, right? Think about this classroom. What is something you would do to be able to give feedback? Because we said this classroom's starting to do differentiation. There's things going on where kids are in different places doing different activities. What might you need to do to have more information to be able to provide good feedback for this teacher? What questions might you ask the teacher?
I guess I want to understand what they're doing at the different areas within the classroom.
Absolutely.
And maybe how long, how many stations are, if it is in stations, or how long do they stay on a task or an activity, and how do they transition from one to the next?
Another question might be, how did you group your students? Why did you group them the way you did? Because what does that tie back to?
Your data. What data did you use?
You got to be using data to be able to answer that question. Anybody else? Okay, look at this one. What do you see? What would you either ask the teacher? Because sometimes when you observe, you don't really have information to give feedback on until you start having those discussions with teachers. So what would you ask in this classroom, or what would you suggest for this classroom?
To see if all of them had like a specific job or responsibility in the group, because the girl with the green hoodie on, she looks like she's explaining, and then the girl right behind her with the flip chart, she looks like she's explaining. So I don't know if they're like reporters or what jobs they had.
So do the students have specific jobs, and how did you determine who did what job? I think that's great.
I'm also thinking about evidence of learning. So at the end of all this, how will you measure? How do you know that the groups or each student got what was intended from the activity? So I guess evidence of learning.
That is key. If you're going to do an observation or a walkthrough in a classroom and you see good stuff, the best question to always follow up with, okay, in the future lessons, tell me what you're doing to measure their mastery of that content. How are you going to determine that they mastered what you wanted? Because they're all engaged, and engagement is good if mastery comes. So we've got to make sure that we have them engaged on the right task to produce the mastery. All right, real quick, and I promise you I'm going to hurry because I know I'm running out of time, or I'm already over time. This is what I used for my staff, and I thought it was a really good way for me to model what we did with our students. So before I go here, our district gave us, they took the standard, and then we talked about, and it was a team of individuals who came together, a team of educators, and we planned what a student should be able to do if they met the standard or if they were working on the standard. And that's where we started with. We didn't start with differentiation at every level. We started with those students who had met and the students who were slightly below working on the standard. What are we going to do? Whoops, sorry. Then over here to the side, I would do a mini lesson, but then I gave the student 3 different options of going back and reviewing the material that I had taught. Okay. Then they had a group of like 6 different choice board activities. And this is either for the MET group or for the progressing group. That was our practice it. And then our evidence of learning was either a ticket out the door. It might be a unit assessment. And there was always a blank square. Show what you know. And the students could determine how they wanted to show what you know. They had to come and ask you, can I do blah, 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 to show how I know. And so going through that, I wanted to do that with my staff. So if I were going to implement differentiation in my classrooms, in my school, I would say the outcome, what do I want my teachers to be able to do? I want them to be able to implement at least 2 phases of differentiated instruction in their classroom. So I might link videos right here that show how to unpack the standard. I might have a 1-page handout that goes over how you unpack the standard. I might link my standards there. Another task that they could do for differentiated instruction is create a playlist for their students to give some choice in activities that are aligned to the standard. We might have a pre-assessment. They have to give a pre-assessment and then collect data and analyze the data and talk about how that's going to help them begin to differentiate instruction. It might be that I'm planning small group instruction. Those are just 4 tasks. You can put anything in there. But then I define if you are a beginner in this phase, and I always said to my teachers, no matter where you're at, it's okay. If you are a beginner, that means you are unpacking the standards and writing essential questions, and you're giving students choice for grade level and below grade level. You have choice boards for them. If you are intermediate, you are unpacking the standards, you're giving a pre-assessment, and you're giving students choice by on grade level, above, and below. So now I've created choice boards for 3 groups. If you are proficient, that means you are doing all of those things and you have incorporated small group instruction that is data-driven into your classroom. If you are advanced, you are not only doing all of those things, but now students have individual goals, data notebooks where they are tracking their own data, and your learning plans are a little different. And then for my teachers, I would say, okay, you can submit your lesson plans for me to review to give you credit. You can do a video lesson. They always knew too that if they didn't want to do a video lesson, they could ask me to walk through and give them feedback. And my screen, they could do a learning plan and submit that, or they could submit another way that they wanted to show me that they had mastered that differentiated instruction in their classroom and their level. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
I think the thing that, this was not year 1 of us doing this, so I need you to know that. This was like year 2. But I think what it allowed me to do was to help my teachers truly understand that everybody comes to the table different. And differentiation is trying to create a plan to meet the different and get them to where the end result is. And so it was super important for them to experience, I'm not the best at everything. I'm really good at a lot of things, but there's areas I can grow, even if I'm one of the rock star teachers. For my low teachers, it gave them that environment to where I said, it's okay not to know how to unpack your standards. I can get you there, but we got to do it through a progression. I can't expect you to come in week 2, creating choice boards and setting student goals and doing all of that the way that they need to. So giving teachers the autonomy to say, I don't know how to do that without penalty, as long as I'm growing, was key to me being able over the course of 2 years to creating an environment, a school where this is happening pretty regularly. So my encouragement to you is to find a starting point with them, find out where they are, build that trust that you're truly there to coach them and grow them, but also to be the monitoring piece and to do it without, I'm not mad at you if you didn't meet it, but you didn't meet it. So here's the consequence. Because I think that gives the environment to where you are differentiating for your staff and meeting their needs so that you can get them to be the best version of them as a teacher. And so the last thing, I think the last slide is differentiation is making sure the right students get the right learning at the right time so that we have graduates who give back to our community, whether they go through college, career, or military, or just some other stay-at-home moms even. I told one of my girls, her whole goal in life is to be a stay-at-home mom. And I said, well, I want you to be a well-educated stay-at-home mom, and that'll be fun. At this time, I've got some scenarios. I'm not going to go over those, but if y'all want to use those later, there's some teacher evaluation videos that'll come up where you can take the NESIS evaluation and talk about if you want to do it later, but where you can go through and look at what do you see that is going well in that classroom? What do you see in regards to differentiation? And then what is your complement for that teacher? But then the 2 action steps that the teacher would take. And so I will give you guys that whenever, if you would like to use it at any other time. Thank you so much. Do you have any questions?
Everyone's saying no. I'm realizing that I'm the one that you can't see, but I'm manning the ship. So then everyone's shaking their head no, but this has been really great.
It really has been.
Well, I hope that you can at least take away what is an action item that I can do with my staff. Remember, for you, in order for you to sustain and support, you've got to do it in chunks. You can't expect mastery overnight. You've got to recognize that it's going to take time. And so you have to start with an action plan, but know where you're going. Use your data to help get you there. Best of luck to you guys. Thank you for letting me come today and share. I appreciate the opportunity. Dr.
Thank
Lamb,
you,
I'll
Dr.
turn it
Lamb.
over to you.
All right. I will make sure that I send Dr. Payne's presentation. I will email it out later as soon as we get through this morning. I do want to remind you of our session next month. I believe it's 4 weeks. It's March the 10th. Dr. Josh Sane will be talking about exceptional learners, exceptional children's program, the laws and those things, but also how that fits into the inclusion model, those students in classrooms, which kind of dovetails onto this one. So we look forward to seeing you again next month. If there's anything else before we go. All right. If not, we've enjoyed it. Thank you for your time and participation. We'll see you next month. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Let us know.